Hello. I want to say hello and welcome to all of you who are here today and all of you who are joining us on the video. For some of those who may not know me, I'm Ron's wife, Sherry, and we're taking a little time today to remember our friend, Ron. I'll start by telling you a little bit about what I know of his life. Ronald William Albiston was born on January 26, 1941 in Soda Springs, Idaho. Wait a minute, gotta put my glasses on. I forgot I can't see. I'm one of those little old ladies that wears a half a dozen of them around my neck, so I can see wherever I need to. Thanks, Steve. His mom and dad, Fern and George Albiston, lived in Conda, a town about 6 miles northeast of Soda Springs. Conda was the home of phosphate mines. The material was used for agricultural fertilizer and other industry. The year before Ron was born, the Conda mine took the national lead in vanadium production in response to the World War II effort. Vanadium is a rare but important byproduct of manufacturing phosphate fertilizer. It is added to make high-grade armor, bullets, and bombs, World War II. Ron's dad, George, worked in these mines. And when George was younger, the doctor that delivered Ron and his sister Glenna Jo the following year had approached him with the idea of going to medical school and becoming a doctor also. Well, like young men everywhere, George thought he could make more money working in the mines, and he turned down the offer. Now, Dr. Ellis Cackley was an interesting man in many ways. He was born in 1871 in Tennessee, and 3 days after he graduated from medical school, he took a train to answer an ad for a position which happened to be at the end of the train line, Soda Springs. He set up shop, and he was one of the old-time doctors that came to you. One of his frequent companions on those events was a black midwife named Mother George. Together, they delivered hundreds and hundreds of babies. And imagine everyone's surprise when Mother George died and they found that she was actually a he. Dr. Cackley and one of his sons, who was also a doctor, built the hospital in Soda Springs where Ron was born, and the elder Dr. Cackley died in 1943 at the ripe old age of 72. After the children were born, George decided he didn't want his son to grow up in the mines, and opportunities for change were few, just like a lot of places. So he decided to join the United States Army. While he was deployed overseas, Fern took the children and went to stay with various relatives until he returned. Her parents, her sisters, and their husbands, and other relatives as well, and that was how things were done in those days. You stayed with family. When George returned from the Army, he and another relative, I'm not sure if it was a brother or an uncle or a brother-in-law or who, but they decided to try their luck at farming in the Grandview, Idaho area. Well, from what I gather from this venture, the best crop they produced consisted of rattlesnakes and rocks. After some lean times, George decided to move on. Somewhere along the way, he managed to learn the trade of saw filing. In many areas, the name interchangeable with that of saw filer was saw doctor. So the hope of his becoming a doctor came to fruition. He was just a doctor in a different trade. He got a job near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they moved to a little town just outside of Coeur d'Alene named Biggs. Housing was scarce, as it is today, and for at least one winter, they lived in a tent house. Ron informed me that it was actually quite snug and warm in the winter, not a bad place to live. Eventually, they found a real house, and George even built on a little room so Ron could have his own bedroom. The school he attended wasn't in Biggs. He had to walk over to the Coeur d'Alene section. And per usual with kids, there was some animosity between the kids in the two different districts. Apparently Ron and two of his buddies became quite adept at fighting their way to school in the morning and fighting their way back home in the afternoon. And they lost a few lunch pails in the process. Ron had a great time with his buddies, and Ron's mom dubbed them the Giddy Gaddy Gibbs Gang. They did all kinds of things together. In the summer, they often visited the hobo camps that were prevalent in the area. Now, the hobos aren't what we call tramps or bums, and they were quite friendly. They were the fellows that traveled all over, usually riding the rails, which was close by there, apparently. And Ron said their food wasn't too bad either. So one day, Ron and his buddies were out walking around, and they heard a call for help. Apparently, some little boy had fallen into the river. Without hesitation, Ron went to the river and jumped in and pulled him out. And the city named him a hero, and he got a nice little write-up in the paper. And that was just the first time Ron was credited with saving another's life. Eventually, the family moved to Missoula so his dad could work in a mill nearby there. Sawfilers were known for frequent moves because of their work. Ron met his lifelong love of the Grizz there and has been a steadfast fan ever since. He also learned about the pitfalls of being an entrepreneur as well. Like many boys of that age, he got a paper route. He saved up his money and he bought a beautiful brand new 3-speed bike, all tricked out. Even had handle grips with tassels on them and big saddlebags for his newspapers. Well, competition was pretty rough. One morning he was headed over the bridge to go pick up his papers, and he was met by some young toughs that was just a little bit more than he could handle. They dumped his new bike over the rail and into the river, creating a bitter moment in his young life. Later, they moved again to the Hamilton area. Now, Ron and his little sister, Glenna Jo, had always been pretty good playmates. She had a great talent for entertaining, and she had a beautiful singing voice and loved to dance and was a very good skater, and Ron was her wingman. Being quite tall, he'd hold a flashlight over her while she did her little acts, and she would entertain her little heart out. Well, one day they were playing outside, and not all kids had fancy toys in those days, and they just played with whatever they had at hand. They found a stick, and they were bouncing it back and forth between the two of them. And don't you know, it ended up hitting her in the eye, and it just popped it right out of the socket. Well, the bloody screaming brought the grown-ups. They hauled her off to the dock, and he put it back where it belonged, and apparently she was none the worse for wear. Well, this incident was eventually forgotten. Maybe. But when the kids were attending school in Hamilton, they had some kind of a function going on, and they had a cakewalk. Well, Ron won this great big beautiful luscious cake, and after school he had ball practice. So he asked his sister if she would take the cake home for him. Oh yeah, she was happy to do that. So off her and her little girlfriends went with the yummy dessert, and when Ron got home, they hadn't even saved him a lick of it. Revenge? Maybe, who knows? Anyway, there was never any more wingman stuff for him. He was always tall for his age, but being a growing boy at that age wasn't always fun. He said he had to carry his birth certificate with him when they went to the movies, because if he didn't, they'd charge him adult prices. When he graduated from the 8th grade, he sprang up another 6 inches during the summer and hitting 6 feet by the time he was a freshman. Ron's summers were spent on his grandparents' farm outside of Meridian, Idaho. He and his cousin Donnie helped in the fields and with whatever chores that needed doing. They were long days filled with work, but they also had some fun. They had some little goats to play with, and Donnie had a great time teaching little Billy to butt heads with him. Well, it was fun, that is, until Grandma was bent over weeding the garden. Little Billy decided to play with Grandma. They didn't see little Billy after that. Another time, Ron and Donnie decided to play with her chickens. Who knew that if you took them and put their head under the wing and lined them all up, they wouldn't move. They'd just sit there until they died. Well, boys being boys, they got the chickens all in place, and they ran and said, "Grandma, Grandma, something's wrong with your chickens. Come and take a look." Well, Grandma looked and then hollered for Grandpa. Ron says he grabbed each of them by an arm and proceeded to kick each one in the behind with each foot all the way back to the woodshed. One summer, life was happening at home as well. Ron's dad wrote a little story that I'll relate to you. One time I took Ron's mom, Fern, and her sister Glenna, and her friend out fishing in a little creek north of Coeur d'Alene. The two girls hiked on up the creek, and Fern was a little ways behind. And all at once she let out a scream for the girls. I looked back, and she was jumping up and down in the same place just as hard as she could go. She went back to the car, and he says, I went on up after the girls. There were two bears sitting up there on the hillside watching us. I woofed at them. Fern heard me back at the car, thought the bears had me, and ran to a farmhouse for help. She didn't take the car because she had never learned to drive. I was walking back over the hill with the girls, and here came Fern. Half the farmers, Coeur d'Alene Valley, with their pitchforks, guns, and what have you. Boy, was she mad when she found out the bear hadn't at me. The family moved to Kalispell a week before Ron entered high school. The first day of school, he met a fellow that to this day is still one of his best friends, Gordy Schlobs, and he sat side by side at the freshman school assembly. Not long after, he became acquainted with an entire group of guys he ran around with for the next 4 years, and many are still close in touch. A few years separated their lives for a time, but they managed to get in touch again as they all filtered back home when they entered their senior years in life. Now, high school was a rowdy time of boys being boys and girls being girls. Many parties, much horsing around, and lots of hanging out, giving each other cool names to go by. Smack, Tuffy, Stanley, Fish, oh, those are just a few. Someone got the idea that Al Capone was cool, and Big Al was a natural for the name Albiston. Then someone decided to add the C to Al, and he became Alk, and that eventually gave way to Elk, and that's what he was remembered by forever after. When he was older, the guys that he worked with said he was big enough to go hunt the grizzly with a switch, so they dubbed him Grizz. So only the girls and his mama still called him Ron. The adventures they had were many and eventful. One of the guys decided he was mad at his family and wasn't going to go home. Well, good buddies don't let buddies run away alone. So they all trooped up to Whitefish, managed to crawl in one of the boxcars, and being winter, it was pretty cold in there. They got as far as up by the park somewhere when the so-called mad guy decided he wasn't mad anymore and wanted to go home. So the group caught a different car going back the other way, and on the way back was apprehended by a worker on the railroad. It was fortunate because by then, Ron had actually frozen his tailbone and was only too happy to have a bit warmer ride back, at least part of the way. Another time, they got wind of the show in Spokane featuring the great Elvis Presley. Well, the day before the show, somehow they were apprehended. Beer was found, surprise, and they were questioned and hauled off to the city hoosegow. They were guests of the city overnight and missed the show. He said he was introduced to what a cavity search was. And since he was so tall, his feet hung over the cot and through the bars on the cell where he had to sleep. Not a fun outing. This was just a couple of the times that I know of, but I'll bet some of you guys in the audience can tell us many other stories about your shenanigans. And the only thing that I've learned after listening to so many of them, could any of you guys drive? I think you must have wrecked half the cars in Flathead County. Despite all that, you managed to graduate from good old Flathead County High School. And by then, Ron had shot up to 6'5" and was weighing in at about 180 pounds. The next day or so, he headed back to Hamilton and went to work in the supermarket. He and his roommate, who also worked at the store, was subsiding on one TV dinner a day and any produce they could grab at the store. He had signed up for the National Guards while he was still in school, and he finally got his orders to report for boot camp. He didn't care much for Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and some of the stories he told about his time there were definitely not very funny. Somehow his training also took him to Fort Ord, California. He liked going to San Diego, where he loved the seafood, which was cheap and plentiful. And he told a story about going home for Christmas and having to report back to camp on a certain day. He had enough money for his ticket and a little cash besides. And another fellow on the bus, and Ron had enough, another bus on the way back, another guy who was headed the same place lost his ticket and his money. Well, another guy on the bus and Ron had enough to get him another ticket, but they were left with only enough money between the three of them to share one hamburger a day until they reached camp, and I think it was about 3 days. The guy never did pay the money back for the ticket. And one payday at camp, Ron hit him up, and he claimed he had no money, but he would pay for a tattoo for him. So Ron got the only tattoo he ever had. It cost $2.50. One day it swelled up and ran orange all over his arm. And so much for that. Ron spent 8 years in the Guards. Ron was courting a pretty and popular girl who had been in his high school class, Bonnie Tiffany. They decided to get married, and they had a lovely wedding on New Year's Eve in 1960. His buddy Homer stood up with him, and even then he and Homer made a striking pair, as one was just about twice as tall as the other. Homer was another guy who was still a great friend after they could reconnected in their later years. Sometime around then, or maybe before, Ron's dad had trained him to be a saw filer, and that became Ron's vocation in life as well. At one time he was going to go to college to become a sociologist, but at the last minute he had second thoughts and went to work instead. He worked very hard to support his little family. By that time he and Bonnie had a couple of sons they were raising, Wade and Rand. Ron worked at the mill in the daytime and then on a ranch after he got home. True to the life of saw filers, he soon pulled up stakes and they moved east of the mountains and they lived in Lincoln and Browning. When they moved to Lincoln, Ron enjoyed many of the things that he did there. Besides working in the sawmill, he and another fellow owned a small chainsaw and snowmobile shop. He loved going out on his sled and racing with the other guys. They bowled league, and he played basketball with a local group that traveled all over the vicinity playing other towns. Ron and Bonnie both worked at a supper club off and on. He bartended and she waitressed, and he was a volunteer fireman and ambulance driver. There were a number of harrowing calls he was sent on. One was a lady who had gotten all dressed up just to attempt suicide. He worked on her for so long, her ribs were all broken and her jaws dislocated, but she would have died for sure if he hadn't kept up the ordeal for so long. Months later, she came by Bonnie's beauty salon to tell her to thank Ron for saving her life, and that she'd never do it again after what she went through. He also saved another lady's life on the way home from work one day. She'd been canning food on the stove and she had a seizure and passed out. Her trailer caught on fire and her kids come running out to the road and stopped him. He had to do the crawl under the smoke to get to her and pull her out. But these were some of the stories that he told me, but I think there might have been quite a few others that he didn't talk about. He enjoyed his time on the res. It was rich in learning about the ways of the people who lived there. And he had many stories about superstitions, the fascinating histories of their ancestors, the people who were their friends, and the toughness of some of the personalities that he came into contact with. He also told about how cold it got there in the winters. They couldn't shut the mills down at night because they wouldn't be able to start them again in the morning. And apparently, the snow got pretty deep there too. It was up over the rooftops. They moved to Helena. They built a nice house and had a little hobby farm. The boys were in 4-H and Ron was the president of the local chapter. They had goats and pigs, a gate lock pecking donkey, and they called him Houdini. I don't know what else. Some horses for the boys to ride. Ron said he never rode for pleasure because he always felt sorry for the horse that had to carry him. They spent every fair week living on the fairgrounds and showing their animals. The family always spent a lot of time together as they had a boat and they loved to fish and to camp. And they also found time to foster other children in their home. At one time, he also belonged to a number of the local clubs, the JCs, the Elks, Moose, and whatever. They also spent time in Bible study and attended church on a regular basis. Ron was a born-again Christian, and he knew the Bible well. After the boys were grown and had their own families, Ron and Bonnie decided to go their separate ways. Ron moved to North Powder, Oregon. He bought a small trailer with 2 tip-outs and set up bachelorhood. He worked at the mill for some years, and he enjoyed square dancing as well as bass fishing. He loved nothing better than to be on the river with a pole and a bass plug at hand. He competed in a number of tournaments on the Columbia River. Eventually, he left the mill, went to work for Missoula Saw. He was a rep to the mills for about 15 years for them. He traveled all over about 3 or 4 states or maybe more, I'm not sure. He always liked going to the Saw Filers Convention with the Miller boys and was inducted into the Saw Filers Hall of Fame on June 11th, 2011. The Millers introduced him to the game of bent clubs and lost balls. Yeah, golf. He enjoyed going out and beating up the greens for a number of years. Apparently he was no pro, but he got a lot of fresh air. Somewhere along the line, he acquired the moniker West Coast Ron. Now I think this came somewhere from the fact that all the gals he picked up along the way came from over that direction. There must have been some proof in it because that's where I lived when we connected. Ron eventually went back to Montana to live, helping with his dad, who was not well, and giving his mother something else to focus on till his dad passed on. He moved to Lolo into an apartment that was truly decorated by a man who had no decorating skills and didn't care. That was when I arrived on the scene. And after a couple of months of long-distance phone calls, a million emails, and a visit or two, we decided age 60 was the right age to embark on a new venture. So he arranged a wedding in Coeur d'Alene along with some good friends who came through for him. And I packed up, sold my house, and transferred from my job from Portland to Missoula. We met up with some family and friends and headed for the hitching post to start a new life together. A little over a year later, we retired from our jobs and tried to have some fun in life. After a couple of years of snowboarding to Arizona, our old habits of not taking care of our bodies caught up with us. We had too many visits to Sawbones to carry on. We moved back to Kalispell and got reacquainted with some old friends and family. Eventually, we bought a little house in Kalispell. We hired a couple of dogs. And those dogs ran our lives. And we hunkered down, attempting to heal our bodies in broken hopes of being kids again. Ron had many interests. First and foremost, his family. By now, he had 2 sons and their 7 kids, and 13 great-grandkids, plus my 4 daughters, 4 grandkids, and 8 great-grands. Then his interest in sawmills. Just as his dad taught him the trade, he passed on his knowledge to both his sons who worked in the business. All our friends. Some have gone ahead of him, some have been by his side on his last journey. Our other relatives who have stayed in touch and been encouraging to him. His interest in history, especially American history. He had an avid interest in the northwestern Indian tribes and could recite their history of many of them and what happened to them and where. And his stance on politics. You always knew what he was thinking about that. He often said he loved his country, but he feared his government. His love of reading. Favorites being Western and history. Zane Grey and Patrick F. McManus were his favorite authors. and The Deer on the Bicycle. Have you read that? I have a copy of it over here. That was one of the first ones that he read, and he loved it. He loved trivia. Silly songs he sang parts of, off-key, very loudly, and goofy poems that he would recite at a breakneck speed. He liked Western music. Think of the Highwaymen and the members in it. Willie, Waylon, Johnny, Chris. Despite everything his body had subjected him to, he always stayed on an even keel. He never yelled, played the blame game, or did anything except his lot in life. He kept his countenance. But he grew tired of being tired, and he said he wanted to go home. 5 days before he left, he told me that God said he could come home. He was content, and he continues on his new journey. We're going to have a little break from me now. We're going to listen to a couple of songs sung by the Classic Touch. This is a barbershop quartet made up of my son-in-law, Steve Kaufman, his brother, Ken Kaufman, Jeff Houston, and Charles Peterson. Now, Steve and Jeff have been singing together since high school. A couple of years now. Yeah. Okay, so we've got the Classic Touch.
Thank you. I've been Sherry's son-in-law for a little over 40 years now, and knew Ron for some 20 of those. So like 2.5 years ago, I think, or something like that, this quartet had started learning a Christmas song, kind of a kid's song, and we'd be over at Ron and Sherry's, and there'd be something said about what do you want for Christmas, and I'd just start singing, I want a hippopotamus for Christmas, and Ron would say, you know, you could hear him, you better be careful what you wish for, young man. So, and I was never quite sure was he. thinking of Ron and Sherry, but for many of you who were his friend, you only have to change 2 or 3 words in there to just make it between good buddies or however you might relate to Ron. And so ebb tide.
A kiss on the shore, then rolls on to sea, and the sea is very still once more. So I rush to your side like the oncoming tide, with one burning thought, will your arms open wide. At last we're face to face, and as we kiss through an embrace, I'm at peace in the web of your
Thank you. The last one we'll do right now is a Larry Gatlin song. If you know anything about the Gatlins, you know about close harmony, and that's one thing barbershoppers love. So a barbershop arrangement of Alleluia.
May all our hallelujahs, when spoken and heard, be heartfelt thanks to Thee, dear Lord. And not just lovely words, and with each passing moment, till the ending of our days, be filled to overflow
Thank you, fellows. That was lovely as always. Excellent. And now, we'd like to take a little time to have some other people come up and share some things about Ron. I know a lot of you probably knew him a lot longer than I did. Honestly, the only thing I remember was when we were in high school and I was a study hall aide, and he would come in, sit down at the front of the room, wait until I took roll, and then saunter out. So if any of you would like to speak today, I'd invite you to come up. I think one of my daughters has something to read about from some of the grandchildren's memories. If you'd like to start, Ginger, and then anybody else that would like to come up and share, we would appreciate that. When we're done, I want to take a moment too to thank all of you who helped me put this together today. Luke Lauderay back there has been a big help to me. I don't know what I would do without him. And my daughters, two who came from Oregon and two who are here, they put together the meal and helped us do all the stuff that needed to be done, so took the pressure off of me, which I appreciate, because I'm a little bit lazy. And then when you leave today, on the table over here, there's some little velvet bags, and they contain some ashes, Ron's. And I know you all have some memories, and you're welcome to take them. Take them with you to wherever you had spent some time with them and scatter them and relive that memory. So, okay, everybody, now I'll just turn you over. Ginger.
I'm Ginger, Sherry's oldest daughter. I have a couple pieces here from Ron's grandchildren. The first one is from Christy Albiston Howe. She says, "Some of my fondest memories of Grandpa are of us kids playing with his hands, feet, and his head. And as he got older, he got balder, and I always talked to him about kissing him on his bald head. My sister Cora even got herself a manicure set and would give him some pretty good manicures like that. Okay. He never got annoyed with us, he just let us have fun. Grandpa would visit us a lot when I was a kid. He was very present in our lives, talking to us, and I grew up knowing I was loved. Dad and Mom used to say if we were ever in a bad situation or made a serious mistake in life, Grandpa Ron would always love us, probably tell us how dumb we were, but we better listen because he also tells us how to best fix our situation. Knowing I was well loved and cared about helped me make better decisions in life. I knew I wouldn't lose my parents' or grandparents' love, but they gave me the desire to make them proud, not to do things that would reflect poorly on them or make them worry about me. My father is Grandpa Ron's youngest son. He's unable to be here due to early onset dementia, but if he were able to share with you today, he would tell you what he always told me. Grandpa was where you went for wise counsel, and he was good at that. He's the one who'd be there when everyone else left to go. Albistons take care of each other, love each other, work hard, and most importantly, love God. One of the stories my dad told often was when our family was having a hard time and needed a vehicle, my grandpa helped us get a truck. And after a year of making payments, Grandpa called and told him for Christmas he didn't need to make any more payments. My dad was always doing his best to provide for our family, so Grandpa helping him have a way to get to and from work was huge to him, and he never let us forget. I appreciate my grandpa not only for being a great grandpa, but also for raising my dad to be a great dad. I'm thankful that because my grandpa knew he was a sinner in need of a savior, he humbled himself before God, asking him to forgive him of his sins, and accepted his gift of salvation. So when my time on earth this earth is done, I will see my grandpa again in heaven. And this is from Randy Lynn Albiston, Boise. She says, after her great-grandpa, George Albiston, passed away, Randy Lynn spent a couple weeks with her grandma in Conner, Montana. When it was time for her to go home, her grandpa Ron took her back to Colville, Washington. She remembers how amazed she was at all the stories he told her about the areas they were driving through. He had a vast knowledge of history and geography of the entire region. He also taught her some silly songs about a bear and some equally funny poems. And then there's a poem here that I was given to read. A limb is fallen from our family tree. I keep hearing a voice that says, grieve not for me. Remember the best times, the laughter, the song, the good life I lived while I was strong. Continue my heritage. I'm counting on you. Keep smiling and surely the sun will shine through. My mind is at ease, my soul is at rest, remembering all how truly I was blessed. Continue traditions, no matter how small. Go on with your life, don't worry about falls. I miss you all dearly, so keep your chin up until the day when we're together again.
I guess the main thing that I can always remember for Ron is he was just a real friend. You know, you could ask him to do something or whatever. He was just good and honest about it. But there's no doubt about the way we were really very good friends was we played basketball together on the same intramural team because we didn't want to mess with the reserves, the freshmen, because we wanted to party at night. And that was our choice. We were in auto mechanics together, and like I say, basketball. But our main entertainment was getting a case of beer and driving around Flathead Lake. It's sad to say because of the way things are now. We were crazy kids, and but that was the main thing. Maybe take Naaman and Beaver and Ron and I, we'd go around the lake. But he was just a special friend, and he stayed that way. We stayed in touch, not an awful lot, because I farmed east of the mountains, and Ron was here, you know, or wherever doing his thing. But the main thing I remember is he was just a great guy, and he stayed that way later on here. But we stayed in touch all the time. Just a swell guy. But while I'm here, I think there's someone we all want to talk about, and that's Sherry. The work that she's gone through and everything, keeping our class and everything in touch with each other and everyone. Sherry, I'll just always admire the work that you've done for us. And it takes off from Ron too. You did it together. But anyway, that's what I can remember about Ron. And when you talk about picking someone up where they were in a car, that could have been me, Sherry, because I'm the one that went up and got him. It is. Anyway, thanks.
Jordy, I'll get you one. Oh, yeah, I need you to stand right.
Yeah, bring it right.
Good enough, we can hear you. We can hear you good enough.
Our friendship goes back to, say, high school days, where Ron and I got together and friends all the way through and up to the time of that very first time, like Sherry said, he was from Hamilton, down the western part, and I was here coming up from Kalispell, coming to Kalispell from Bigfoot. And we sat together at the freshman assembly and we were talking, got to be together, and we were all the way through. Great friend. I got a couple of stories, since they mentioned beer. That goes back to the freshman year, we got together, and I had a 49 Chevy pickup, big wheels, and we decided to go to Tally Lake. And so we packed up the gear, Homer and myself and Ron, and we headed to Town Lake. We got there, and of course we had some beer, and the homemade wine got to us. But we enjoyed each other, built a fire, set up camp, and had a good time. Next morning, Ron says, let's go up to the mountains up there, take the truck, and go up there and see what's going on. So sure enough, we piled in. I says, I'm not driving, you drive. So we got in behind the wheel and took off up the hill and mountain, and it was just a logging road trails. And we got to go climbing, and all was boom, boom. We went down at one of those washouts, got stuck, and we were teetering back and forth, and just got really cautious. So we climbed out, Owen climbed up over Ron, and I climbed up over Owen, got up in the ground. Then we said, now what are we going to do? We did it very carefully, because it was teetering. And fortunately, we got up there, and then luckily a Forest Service truck was coming along. And you guys need some help? Yeah. So he got some log chains out and pulled us back up on the road. And that was the end of that story.
And you're alive.
Yeah, we were alive, thank goodness, because I looked down and it was all the way down to the bottom of that mountain. And we could have been all three with Ron today. But anyway, that goes freshman year. Then we raised a lot of cane throughout the high school years, and then went to a basketball game as a senior. The whole town shuts down on basketball tournaments. Kalispell qualified, and so we all jumped in cars and headed for Butte. It was in Butte, and Butte Fieldhouse at that time had a pretty nice basketball court, but down the hallways it was just very narrow hallways. And we were coming down one hallway. We were going to welcome the good luck to the team, and lo and behold, there comes Sweeney and a coach from Colorado State. I was supposed to meet him there and go out and talk about football. But anyway, there's the elk behind me, and pretty quick I see a bunch of smoke coming up over the top of me, right in the face of the coach. You know, he smoked those cigars, and it could blow out through his teeth. He had gaps in his teeth, and he wanted to be there. So I nudged him. I said, get back. This guy's important. He'd beat it down for a while. Then he'd come up with a big smoke again, right through the teeth. And needless to say, that was the end of my trip to Colorado State. So all in all, we really enjoyed high school, different things, different parties that we went to, and I didn't realize that he was such a singer. But sometimes I miss that along the line. But anyway, we enjoyed different activities throughout the summer, and he was a great guy. So God bless.
Over here. This kind of fits in with Gordo's talk. Ron had a way with words, and he did come up with a few nicknames for people. But anyway, this will be short and sweet. Don Buck was Bucky Beaver. Roger Pauli, Walleye. I'm Smack. And we got a couple of them right here. Senor Slobs was El Gordo. And the other guy sitting beside him had another name, Eckelbug. Then Jim Meacham was Meat, and Steinmetzer was Horse. She knew that. That was good. But anyway, this goes with Gordy was saying at the end. Albiston was a really good friend with Sweeney, That's a joke. And we had a really good basketball team. We're an intramural basketball team. We almost took first one time, but anyway, Albiston named the team Jim's Boys after Jim Sweeney. A little bit. So that's it. Here we go.
Close to it. And my name is Donna Miller, and in 1995, I started working at the shop in Missoula. Ron was there, and called him Big Ron at that time. 1999, I turned 35 years old. I bought my first car. And as to the nicknames that you guys all have, Ron says, well, you need to name it. Okay, well, what do I name it? Ron always called me Sweetie. So, on my Mustang, 1999, first car we ever bought, my license plate is Sweetie. And it still goes back to Ron being like a dad to me there at the shop. Oh, you?
My name is Brian. I'm Donna's husband. I have a little different twist on Ron when it comes to that story. But the barbershop quartet, you guys that was absolutely beautiful. Very, very nice. Hats off to you people. But my uncle hired Ron to be a salesman. And he was pretty much a sales manager, my uncle, my father's brother. And in my uncle's passing, Ron and I were talking on the phone, and he was in Oregon at the time, and he says, Brian, he says, I don't want you getting any ideas. And I says, what do you mean, Ron? He says, well, in the passing of your uncle, I'm not sure what's next, but he says, you will not be my boss. And another little quick story I have on Ron was after he'd moved back to Darby to be with his parents, he went to work in the office, and we were standing in there visiting one day, and we were talking about a customer up here in Kalispell, Mike Hansen, and he says, yeah, Mike and I went to school together. I said, really? And I says, well, did you go to school with my mom, which would have been Helen Bernard, if anybody knows her? And he says, as a matter of fact, I did. And I says, so with a little bit of luck in a 32 coupe, you could have been my daddy? And he looked at me and he says, if I was your daddy, he says, I would have hit you in the head and raised a pig. At least I'd had something to eat.
Sounds like Ron, yeah. Anyone else?
I do have, I don't need that. I do have another story. I didn't know whether to tell it or not. But anyway, we were out one night and everything, and we went out south of town. I don't know what the road is that cuts across over there, but maybe a lot of us will remember it. There's a big old gravel pit out there and a house kind of over to one side of it that had a red light on it. And we were out there goofing around in the yard and everything, and pretty soon came out and everything, and kerboom! And Ron's dad had just gotten this 58 Ford car, four-door. And anyway, it hit the tail light. It hit the tail light of that thing, and broke the lens on it. And we kept it covered up until we went and got that dang tail light fixed and everything on the car. But I'll never forget that anyway.
Well, I'll share another story with you.
They're getting, they're getting.
And Ron had with a JV basketball team, and we got in trouble the day, the week before or something. Anyway, the coach just got through drifting, and we were coming down there getting dressed for the game. Klaus and Elvis, you guys get on the end of the bench. So that's where we have to sit for the rest of the day and the rest of the season, I
We have any more stories? You're getting gespier. Yeah, I was like to wait a while. Well, I missed that one. Okay, well, that's it then. We're gonna have another little bit from the classic touch. We're gonna have them sing the blessing, and then you're all welcome to join us in some lunch and some more visiting. And thank you all, everyone, for coming and for all the help. Thank you. Thank you.
Great God.